Welcome to the Surviving BPD Relationship Breakup Podcast. If someone in your life has BPD, you know how difficult it can be, and you need to learn how to heal from those toxic relationships. And that's where this show comes in. Expert education, expert knowledge, expert insight, and delivered with compassion and empathy. With your host, counselor and trauma recovery coach, ajmahari. To purchase and book sessions with AJ, go to ajmahari.ca. Now your host, AJ Mahari.
A couple things before we start this episode. I have a website for this podcast, and it's at survivingbpdrelationshipbreakup.com. Interactive website. It's a website is its own feed for the podcast and also for my YouTube channel. So if you'd like to get a lot of the videos that aren't in this podcast, you'd like to check those out, you can do that at survivingbpdrelationshipbreakup.com. I would just like to encourage you to please leave a 5-star rating for this podcast if you find it helpful, to help this podcast keep growing and keep reaching more and more people who could benefit from this content. I get a lot of people with BPD rating it at 1 star because, they have all these problems with what I'm saying, and they think it's horrible and disgusting and all that kind of BPD kind of stuff. This podcast website is survivingbpdrelationshipbreakup.com. And now, let's dive into today's episode. When touch becomes a bandage, borderline hypersexuality as BPD self-soothing. In this episode, I want to gently and truthfully explain something that so many people often misunderstand, or maybe just don't want to know and continue to deny. The hypersexuality that often is a part of borderline personality disorder for those people who have it, whether they've been diagnosed or not, people experience it as lust, as intimacy, as passion, even as incredible love and signs of love. But underneath that intensity is not romance, not real desire, not love, and not a stable attachment to you or with you. What you're really seeing when a person with BPD is very hypersexual is a person trying to regulate a body and mind that feels unbearable inside. Hypersexuality in borderline personality disorder isn't about using sex for pleasure. And often, sadly enough, it's not even that enjoyed or that pleasurable for people with BPD who are so hypersexual. Hypersexuality is many people with BPD using sex for relief. It's a survival strategy for them, an emotional anesthetic, a momentary buffer against the storm of emptiness, abandonment terror, annihilation fears, shame, and just incredible internal chaos made up of so many other feelings, so many that there's too many to name. And when you don't know the difference, you can feel very bonded to someone and something that was never about you in the first place. Let's walk through what's really happening emotionally and psychologically when a person with BPD becomes sexually intense, impulsive, and or compulsive, when they are hypersexual. In the mind of someone with untreated BPD, or not well enough treated BPD, the inner world is loud, painfully loud and overwhelming. There are flashes of loneliness and emptiness and lack of self that feel like physical danger. It's the anxiety of the death instinct. It's like they're going to re-experience in an unconscious way their original arrested emotional development, which was the psychological death of the otherwise burgeoning authentic self. So people with BPD have this incredible sense of emptiness that feels like falling, feels like they're going to die. It is coupled with very closely, unconsciously, to annihilation fears. Anxiety that spikes without warning, and a profound panic. The connection will disappear at any moment. Their body is wired in survival mode. Fight, flight, freeze, or fawn almost all of the time. Sex becomes a form of regulation because it offers immediate hits of dopamine, oxytocin, attention, distraction, and temporary validation. It interrupts the emotional freefall of the borderline, and it gives the borderline person a momentary sense of being wanted, chosen, or existing in someone else's eyes. And this, to a lesser degree but similar, is happening for many people with codependency as well. For someone with BPD, sex can feel like a sedative. It quiets the internal noise just long enough to breathe. The person isn't choosing hypersexuality because they're, quote, wild, unquote, or because they have high drive. They're choosing it because they're dysregulated, panicking, dissociating, and running from shame. Hypersexuality becomes a coping mechanism, a protective coping mechanism even, when no other internal skills exist to soothe the borderline's incredible, emotionally dysregulated inner storms. Some of which they manifest outwardly too, and most of which the quiet borderline never will, never does, and that can be super confusing. People with BPD are self-soothing through other people's bodies, often not very present during the sexual relations. This is why partners feel confused, why the sexual connection feels intense, intoxicating, and deeply bonding, especially for codependents who attach through emotional caretaking and physical closeness. The partner thinks they're choosing me, they want me, they're connected to me. But the reality of the borderline who's hypersexual is profoundly different than what you might feel or have thought as a person with codependency. The borderline person is not sexually connecting with you. They are using sexual intensity to escape from themselves, lack of self, all their internal, unconsciously driven internal pain that they don't even know why it's happening or what's happening to them. So for many people, most people with BPD, using your body and sex with you in this hypersexuality for soothing themselves, it's not malicious. It's not manipulative in the conscious sense. It's a trauma response. For many people with BPD, their earliest experiences taught them that closeness equals survival and that their worth comes only from being desired or needed. Sex becomes a fast, familiar doorway to connection, though it's not really, real or deep or lasting connection. So more accurately, to the illusion of connection. It gives a burst of, quote, attachment energy, unquote, they cannot sustain emotionally, psychologically, or relationally. This is also why the hypersexual phase often collapses once devaluation starts. Once the panic shifts from the borderline feeling or, unconsciously responding and acting like, quote, I need you to regulate me, unquote, to, quote, you're overwhelming me, suffocating me, or threatening my identity, the sexual intensity shuts off in what is then engulfment fear on the part of the borderline. The soothing you once provided becomes a trigger, and they retreat, dissociate, or emotionally ghost, or definitely ghost and discard. If you experienced a sudden sexual withdrawal after BPD devaluation, please hear this clearly. It wasn't because you became unattractive or unworthy. It was because you were no longer functioning as the bandage for their emotional wounds. Hypersexuality in BPD is not about desire. It's about dysregulation. It's about panic. It's about borrowed self-soothing through your presence, your attention, and your body. The reason this is important for you, especially if you are codependent, to know this, is that hypersexual intensity can create a powerful trauma bond, which is also added to by creating also an incredible fantasy bond. You might have felt or you might feel fused, enmeshed, and so needed. You feel essential. You may have mistaken their desperation for devotion, their intensity for intimacy, their urgency for attachment, and when it stopped, the withdrawal felt like being dropped off a cliff. I want you to know the hypersexual phase was not proof of love. It was evidence of how deeply they were struggling to cope. Your worth was never defined by their sexual hunger. Your rejection was never about your body or your value. And your pain now is not a reflection of a failed relationship. It's the fallout from a psychological pattern of the borderline that was never sustainable. You were not chosen for who you were. You were used for what you could regulate. And that is not love. That is borderline defensive and very kind of selfish survival. Take a deep breath here. Your healing begins when you can separate your sense of self from their self-soothing strategy. When you can see their behavior through the lens of trauma and dysregulation instead of romance or passion. And this can be very painful. And for people, when you thought that all of that wonderful sex was so because you were sharing with them and they were sharing with you, and it was pretty much all about their need to self-soothe. That didn't really include you other than in the obvious way. And when you can finally understand that the intensity was never proof of compatibility, it was an emotional bandage wrapped around a person who didn't know how else to stop their pain. You deserve a relationship where closeness is connection, not coping. You deserve a relationship where intimacy and sexual relations are not only closeness and connection, but the person is present and the person knows who they are, and the person is really expressing feelings as you likely are back to them in that physical intimacy. Where intimacy is mutual is also what you need in your life and deserve, not medicinal for the borderline. Where you also deserve where sex is shared and where it's not used to self-soothe by borderlines and therefore you're not being used. You deserve a love that doesn't need to be regulated because it's already safe. And love and attachment and relating and relationship and communicating, etc., is not safe for most people. It never feels safe to most people with untreated BPD. It feels like they got to have it to feel like somebody else can help regulate them generally. And in hypersexuality, they super got to have it because they need some relief from what's going on inside of them internally. And this isn't always consciously known by people with BPD who are hypersexual. And people with BPD who are hypersexual, it's not limited to women. It's also men with BPD. And so please know it's very difficult, this subject. It's very gentle because I've heard from so many clients how that was the biggest thing that began as they thought at the time a relationship. That is the biggest reason often why people, it's not the only reason, but it's a huge reason if you've been with somebody with BPD that's hypersexual, why it's even harder for you to realize and truly know and take action on getting out of that relationship, ending it, and getting yourself into therapy to heal and recover. Because the way that hypersexual borderlines use sex to self-soothe and are hardly, often not present to really be with you, it's not mutual, they're not sharing with you, they're using your body to regulate their internal agony. And once maybe you realize that, hopefully that will help you to know that as incredible as you've experienced their hypersexuality to be, it's not healthy and it doesn't create a sustainable or lasting type of relating with physical intimacy. It often shuts off, gets cut off at some point. And for a lot of people who are the exes or now not being able to connect again with the borderline who's ghosted or discarded you, it is extremely painful and frustrating, and often what is most focused on, I'm not saying it's the only reason, people are still focused on and ruminating about somebody with BPD when the relationship isn't working, etc., or it's over, or you're not sure if it's over, but it needs to be over. And so the point of all this is just to know that I've heard it described as, the most amazing physical relations ever by countless clients, thousands of people over the last 35 years. And I believe each and every one of them. And I believe that when you realize what borderline hypersexuality really is driven by and what it really does mean for you, it might still be really hard to not want more of that because of what you experience, even when maybe, maybe you notice, maybe you don't notice, maybe it seems strange, maybe it hasn't occurred to you in the bliss of the physical reality that what the person with BPD is actually doing, and likely not consciously, how lacking in mutuality, that experience that is so peak, so often the best that anyone's ever had. I've heard from so many clients. It might still feel like that for you. It might well have been like that for you. But my hope for people understanding this more is that you can tear yourself away from how wonderful that can feel, because you need to find more self-respect for yourself. And that's a really difficult thing to let go of for so many people. But it isn't all that you think it is. But some people will say, it feels so great, I don't even care. Fair enough, but it's going to end abruptly at some point. And then you're going to be kind of like chasing it again in terms of the intermittent reinforcement that can you get that incredible hypersexuality, and what you can experience on the other side of that. Can you get that back? Because who wouldn't really want that back? But it's really a red flag for all that is really going on in your knowing or being with or relating to or dating this person with BPD. And it's just another sign that you're at this apex experience that won't be sustainable. And most people find it very painful, and to the point eventually sooner or later where they don't want this anymore, even though who wouldn't want it still? That's the dilemma, because people with BPD aren't really connecting with you. They aren't really relating to, even in that hypersexual physical reality, but they're just seeking temporary relief. And there's very little that's mutual or being shared with you. It's all like your body is being used by them. And may I add again, often not consciously, but how does it feel to understand, if you will allow yourself to go past denial of this, that the borderline's hypersexuality is using you and using your body? And it might feel great, but is that something that you want to stay with before they pull it away, knowing that it's very difficult to be doing that, invested in that, and have self-respect for yourself? And that matters much more for people with codependency in these situations, because not just about the self-respect of whether you're involved or stay involved with their hypersexuality and how that can be for you or not, but it goes way deeper, and it goes to all of the other issues in borderline personality and how much they're using people and the object of their relations, which means they're not really seeing you for who you are, but object other representation of good parent in idealization or good parent never had, and object representation of bad wounding parent in devaluation. So just hope that people can understand this more. It's very painful to know about this more, and then to try to figure out, well, if they haven't pulled it away from you yet, how are you supposed to walk away from it? Really, really difficult stuff, because to a degree for people with codependency as well, when you're with a borderline that's hypersexual, or when that's still going on, that phase, so to speak, for many it doesn't last a whole long time, many with BPD, but when that's going on, well, you're getting needs fulfilled, not only physically, sexually, that feel incredible. And I've had, many men have described that one of the things that hurts them the most, I mean, lots of other things are hurting men too. Men are not all just about this, but that, men fear, well, I'll never have like that amazing sex with like, quote, a healthier woman, unquote. And there might be some truth to that, but it doesn't mean that it has to be drastically like all fantastically wonderful, amazing, like with the hypersexual borderline, and totally horrible and like remiss, down the road when you do your healing from this relationship, etc. But it's really a difficult thing for people to let go of. And so again, I'll just say, I hope that you can hear this and hear my intent that I want you to understand what's really happening to you when you might be having one of the, often and repeatedly with a hypersexual borderline, having some of the most amazing sex of your life, and yet it's not making love. The person really isn't home. They're not really there, and they're using you and your body to soothe themselves. Not the best news to deliver, but something that people need to understand more and realize too that usually the hypersexuality does at some point, they just pull it away. And regardless of that and how much this is something that a lot of people don't want to hear, I hope you will not push it away, think about it, and realize that this is just this is a major arena within which people feel so connected and so amazed by the hypersexual borderline, etc. But it's not the only part of the relationship that is just as unhealthy, though it be more pleasurable, at least physically. It is just but one big aspect of the entire picture of why these relationships won't work out. And it's when that hypersexuality dries up that then someone like yourself would be like really confused and really wanting to know what happened, and it's not about you. And the borderline has no idea. Most people with BPD have no idea when they're hypersexual, why they are, what the sex really means, and how little they're actually mutually or even they're experiencing with you. So again, borderline hypersexuality is often an unconscious way that they are just trying to seek moments of relief from their internal torment, etc., at your expense. Even though it feels good, they're using you and they're using your body.
You've been listening to the Surviving BPD Relationship Breakup Podcast with your host, counselor and trauma recovery coach, ajmahari. For more or get sessions with AJ, go to ajmahari.ca. See you next time.